Felicity Jensen stood 6 feet and 2 inches tall at 19 years old, towering over every woman and most men in San Antonio, Texas. And the year was 1878, when she first realized that her height would be both her greatest burden and her unexpected salvation. The morning sun blazed hot over the dusty streets as Felicity made her way to the general store, her shoulders hunched forward in that familiar way she had developed over the years, trying to make herself smaller, less noticeable. The wooden boardwalk creaked beneath her boots, and she could already feel the stairs beginning to follow her like shadows. Mrs. Henderson clutched her daughter closer as Felicity passed, as if height might be contagious. Old Mr. Patterson stopped mid-conversation with the blacksmith to shake his head in that pitying way that made Felicity's stomach twist. "Lord have mercy, that girl just keeps growing," she heard someone whisper from the saloon entrance. "Ain't natural for a woman to be built like that." Felicity kept her eyes fixed on the store ahead, her fingers gripping the fabric of her simple brown dress. Her mother had sewn it specially, letting out every inch of fabric they could spare, but it still hung awkwardly on her frame, the hem stopping well above her ankles in a way that drew even more attention. In a town where propriety meant everything and women were expected to be delicate flowers, Felicity felt like a sunflower that had grown too tall for its own garden. The general store bell chimed as she pushed through the door, and the chatter inside immediately died down. Mrs. Cooper, the store owner's wife, looked up from arranging canned goods and her smile became strained. "Miss Jensen," she said with forced politeness, "what can I help you with today?" "Just need some flour and sugar, madam," Felicity replied quietly, hating how her voice always seemed too loud in these moments of silence. As Mrs. Cooper gathered the supplies, Felicity could hear the whispers starting again behind her. 2 young women from church, Mary Sullivan and Elizabeth Drummond, stood near the fabric section, their heads bent together in conversation that was clearly about her. "I heard she scared off another suitor last week," Mary said in a stage whisper. Poor William Thompson took one look at her standing next to him and realized his nose barely reached her chin. "Mama says no man wants a wife who can look down at him," Elizabeth added. "Says it goes against the natural order of things. What man wants to feel small next to his own wife?" Felicity's cheeks burned hot. She paid for her goods quickly, gathering them into her arms even as Mrs. Cooper offered to have them wrapped properly. She just wanted to escape, to get back to her family's small ranch on the outskirts of town where she could breathe without feeling like every inch of her was being judged and found wanting. The walk home took 30 minutes on foot, and by the time Felicity reached the modest wooden house and barn that made up the Jensen property, her arms ached from carrying the supplies and her heart ached from carrying the weight of being different. Her father, Thomas Jensen, was mending a fence post near the road, and he looked up as she approached, his weathered face creasing with concern. "That bad today, was it?" he asked gently. Felicity tried to smile, but it came out wobbly. "Same as always, Papa." Thomas set down his tools and walked over to his daughter, placing a calloused hand on her shoulder. He was 5'9", which meant Felicity had to look down slightly to meet his eyes now. "Your mama and I, we raised you to be proud of who you are. The Lord made you exactly as He intended." "The Lord made me a spectacle," Felicity said, the words coming out more bitter than she intended. "I am sorry, Papa. I just do not understand why I had to be made so different. Different ain't bad, sweetheart. Just means you are meant for something different than what this little town can imagine." He squeezed her shoulder. "The right man will see that. The right man will not care about something as foolish as height." Felicity wanted to believe him, but after 19 years of being too tall, too awkward, Too much of everything women were not supposed to be, faith was becoming harder to hold on to. She had watched every girl her age from school get courted and married off. She had stood in the back of the church at 5 different weddings in the past year alone, wearing dresses that never quite fit right, smiling until her cheeks hurt while inside she wondered if anyone would ever look at her the way those grooms looked at their brides. Inside the house, her mother Rebecca was kneading bread dough, her small frame barely reaching 5'3". Felicity had gotten her height from her father's side of the family. There had been an uncle, she had heard, who stood 6'5" and had moved up north where people supposedly cared less about such things. "Did you get everything from town?" her mother asked without looking up, her hands working the dough with practiced efficiency. "Yes, Mama." "Good. We will need extra for Sunday dinner. Your brother and his wife are coming with the baby." Felicity's older brother Daniel had married a petite woman named Sarah, who stood barely 5 feet tall and was considered the ideal of feminine beauty in San Antonio. When they stood together, Felicity always felt like some sort of giant from a fairy tale, awkward and out of place at her own family gatherings. The next few days passed in their usual rhythm. Felicity helped with the chores around the ranch, feeding the chickens, collecting eggs, helping her mother with the washing and mending. She was strong, her height giving her an advantage in tasks like hauling water and hanging laundry lines. But even these practical benefits felt like poor compensation for the social isolation she endured. Sunday arrived with its familiar dread. Felicity put on her best dress, a blue calico that her mother had painstakingly altered 3 times to accommodate her frame. The church service itself was bearable because she could sit in the back pew where her height was less noticeable. It was the social hour afterward that filled her with anxiety. The church ladies gathered in clusters outside, their parasols creating patches of shade in the bright Texas sun. Felicity stood near the church steps, trying to make herself useful by helping set out the food for the communal meal, but even this brought unwanted attention. "Felicity, dear, could you reach those cups on the high shelf?" Mrs. Patterson called out. "None of us can get to them." It was the same every week. She was useful for reaching things, for hanging decorations, for any task that required height. But when the younger women gathered to talk about beaux and courtship, about dances and stolen kisses, the circle somehow always closed before Felicity could join it. She was serving punch when she overheard a conversation that made her hand shake so badly she nearly spilled the ladle. "I heard the Yates family is coming through town next week," one of the older women said to another. "They have a son, Wesley, who is a cattleman. Looking to settle down from what I understand." "How old is he?" 26, I believe, "and handsome from what I hear. Every eligible girl in town will be setting her cap for him." The other woman laughed. "Well, not every girl. Can you imagine poor Felicity trying to catch his eye? The man would have to climb a ladder just to court her properly." Their laughter felt like needles in Felicity's skin. She set down the punch ladle and walked away quickly, heading for the grove of oak trees at the edge of the church property where she could have a moment alone. She leaned against one of the broad trunks, closing her eyes and trying to steady her breathing. "They ain't worth your tears." Felicity's eyes snapped open. She had not realized she was crying until a young boy, no more than 12, spoke up from where he sat on a low branch of the neighboring tree. He had brown hair and serious eyes that seemed older than his years. "I am not crying," Felicity said, quickly wiping her cheeks. "If you say so, miss." The boy dropped down from the branch with the easy grace of youth. "But if you were crying, it would be okay. Those church ladies can be meaner than rattlesnakes sometimes." Despite herself, Felicity felt a small smile tug at her lips. You should not say such things about your elders." "Maybe not, but it is true enough." He kicked at her rock with his boot. "I am Charlie Yates. My family just got to town yesterday. My brother Wesley is inside talking to the preacher about something boring." Felicity's heart sank a little. So the Yates family was already here. That meant the parade of young women attempting to catch Wesley Yates's attention would begin soon, and she would have to watch from the sidelines once again. "I am Felicity Jensen," she said, offering her hand to shake, then immediately feeling foolish. Ladies were not supposed to shake hands like men, but Charlie took her hand without hesitation and shook it firmly. "Pleased to meet you, Miss Jensen. My brother is going to like you." Felicity laughed, the sound coming out more sad than amused. "I doubt that very much." "Why?" "You seem nice enough." "Thank you, Charlie, but your brother will be like every other man in this town. They prefer their women small and delicate." Charlie looked confused. "But you are not small, exactly my point." "No, I mean." Charlie struggled to find the words. "I mean that is why he will like you. Wesley ain't like other men. He does not fit neither." Before Felicity could ask what he meant, voices called out from the direction of the church. Charlie grimaced. "That is Mama calling. I got to go, but you will see, Miss Jensen. My brother ain't like the others." He ran off toward the church, leaving Felicity alone with her confusion and a tiny, dangerous seed of hope that she immediately tried to crush. She had been disappointed too many times to let herself hope again. The rest of the day passed without incident. Daniel and Sarah came for dinner with baby Thomas, and Felicity held her nephew carefully, marveling at his tiny fingers and the soft sound of his breathing. Sarah watched her with an expression that might have been pity or sympathy. Felicity could never quite tell which. "You are so good with him," Sarah said softly. "You will make a wonderful mother someday." The words were kind, but they carried the weight of doubt underneath. Someday. As if motherhood was some distant possibility rather than the natural progression everyone else her age was already experiencing. Monday morning brought with it the weekly trip to town for supplies. Felicity's mother needed thread and needles, and her father had asked her to pick up some nails from the hardware store. Felicity made the walk early, hoping to avoid the worst of the crowds and the stares that came with them. The town was relatively quiet at this hour, with just a few shopkeepers opening their stores and some cowboys riding through on their way to ranches outside of town. Felicity was just leaving the hardware store, the small bag of nails in her hand, when she heard shouting from down the street. A horse had gotten spooked somehow and was rearing up in the middle of the main street, its rider struggling to control it. The rider was a tall man, or at least he seemed tall from a distance, dressed in typical cowboy attire with a worn leather vest and a hat that had seen better days. As Felicity watched, the horse reared up again, and this time the man went flying backward, landing hard in the dust. The horse bolted, running straight toward where Felicity stood frozen on the boardwalk. Years of working on the ranch kicked in. Felicity dropped her bag and stepped directly into the horse's path, raising her arms high and wide, making herself as large as possible. "Whoa there," she called out in a firm, steady voice. "Easy now. Nobody is going to hurt you." The horse slowed, its eyes rolling wild, but Felicity kept talking, kept her voice calm and even. She had always had a way with animals. They did not care about her height, only about whether she was a threat or a friend. Slowly, carefully, she reached out and caught the horse's bridle, running her other hand down its neck in long, soothing strokes. "That is it," she murmured. "You are all right. Just got scared, did you? It is all right now." The horse's breathing gradually slowed and it stopped trying to pull away from her. By this time, a small crowd had gathered, including the man who had been thrown. He was limping slightly as he approached, favoring his left leg, and as he got closer, Felicity felt her breath catch in her throat. He was tall. Not just tall, but truly tall, probably 6'4" at least, with broad shoulders and long legs that ate up the distance as he walked toward her. His hat had fallen off in the tumble, revealing dark brown hair and a face that was handsome in a rough, lived-in sort of way. A few days' worth of stubble shadowed his jaw, and his eyes, a striking blue-gray color, were fixed on Felicity with an intensity that made her want to look away and hold his gaze at the same time. "That was some quick thinking," he said as he reached her, his voice deep and warm with a hint of admiration. "You probably saved old Dusty here from hurting himself or someone else." Felicity found herself looking straight across at him, their eyes nearly level. It was such a strange sensation that for a moment she could not speak. She was used to looking down at everyone, used to the feeling of looming over conversations. But this man, this stranger, stood nearly eye to eye with her, and something about it made her feel dizzy. "I have worked with horses my whole life," she finally managed to say, her voice coming out steadier than she felt. "They just need a calm hand and a gentle voice." "Most people would have run the other way," the man said. He was still looking at her with that intense focus, but unlike the stares she usually received in town, this one did not feel judging. It felt curious, interested even. "I am Wesley Yates, just moved to the area with my family." Wesley, Charlie's brother. The man every eligible woman in town was supposed to be chasing. Felicity felt her face grow warm. "Felicity Jensen," she said, then added quickly, "I should return your horse to you." She held out the reins, but Wesley did not take them immediately. Instead, he smiled, a slow smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "You handled him better than I did. Maybe you should keep him." "I could not possibly." "I am joking, Miss Jensen." He took the reins from her, and his hand brushed against hers for just a moment, calloused fingers warm against her skin. "But I am serious about the thanks." That was impressive. The crowd that had gathered was already dispersing, but Felicity could see the looks being exchanged, the whispers starting. She could imagine what they were saying. "Look at those two giants. They are like a pair of mismatched bookends. How strange they look together." She stepped back quickly, creating distance between herself and Wesley. "I am glad I could help. I should be going." "Wait," Wesley said, and something in his voice made her pause. "I know this is forward, but my family is hosting a small dinner tomorrow evening. My mother likes to meet the neighbors when we settle in a new place. Would you and your family be able to join us?" Felicity stared at him, certain she had misheard. "You want to invite my family to dinner, if that would be all right. Charlie mentioned meeting you yesterday at church, and when I asked around this morning, folks said your family's ranch borders the property we just purchased. Seems neighborly to get acquainted." It was a logical explanation, perfectly reasonable, and yet Felicity could not shake the feeling that there was something more to the invitation. The way Wesley was looking at her, with those blue-gray eyes that seemed to actually see her rather than just her height, made her heart beat faster in a way that frightened her. "I will have to ask my parents," she said carefully. "Of course. We are in the old Morrison place, about 3 miles east of town. If you folks can make it, we will be serving dinner around 6. Felicity nodded and quickly made her escape, her mind spinning. She walked home in a daze, barely noticing the heat of the sun or the dusty road beneath her feet. When she told her parents about the invitation, her mother's eyes lit up with interest. "The Yates family. I heard they bought a substantial piece of land. That is very kind of them to reach out to the neighbors." Her father was more cautious. "Did you say the son invited us, Wesley?" "Yes, Papa. He said it was because our properties border each other." Thomas Jensen exchanged a look with his wife that Felicity could not quite read. Well, I suppose it would be rude to refuse. We will go. The next day passed in a flurry of preparation. Rebecca Jensen insisted on making a pie to bring, and she made Felicity help her clean and press their Sunday clothes. Felicity's stomach was in knots all day, her emotions swinging wildly between nervous excitement and dread. She kept telling herself not to read anything into Wesley's invitation, that it was just neighborly courtesy, that he would probably have his eye on one of the petite, pretty girls in town before the week was out. But she could not forget the way he had looked at her, standing nearly eye to eye, or the warmth in his voice when he thanked her. The Morrison place, now the Yates property, was a well-maintained ranch with a large house and several outbuildings. As the Jensen family arrived in their wagon, Felicity could see other families already there. The Hendersons, the Coopers, the Drummonds, all the respectable families from town, and all of them with eligible daughters. Felicity's heart sank. Of course, this was not about her at all. The Yates family was simply making an effort to integrate into the community, and she was just one of many neighbors invited. They were greeted at the door by a woman who must have been Mrs. Yates, a handsome woman in her 40s with graying hair and a warm smile. "You must be the Jensens. Please come in. We are so glad you could make it." The house was spacious and well furnished, speaking to a family of some means. In the large front parlor, people were gathered in small groups, talking and laughing. Felicity immediately spotted Wesley across the room, surrounded by 3 young women who were all gazing up at him with undisguised interest. Mary Sullivan, Elizabeth Drummond, and Catherine Cooper, the 3 prettiest and most eligible girls in San Antonio, all vying for his attention. Felicity felt foolish for having hoped, even for a moment, that the invitation had been anything special. She found a corner to stand in, making herself as invisible as possible, which was difficult given her height. "You came." Charlie appeared at her elbow, grinning up at her. "I told Wesley you would come. He has been watching the door all evening." "I am sure he has been too busy with other guests to notice," Felicity said, nodding toward where Wesley was still surrounded by the 3 young women. Charlie followed her gaze and made a face. "Those girls have been buzzing around him like flies since we got here. It is driving him crazy. He keeps trying to get away, but they just follow him." Even as Charlie spoke, Wesley looked across the room and his eyes met Felicity's. Something in his expression shifted, relief maybe, or gladness, and he immediately excused himself from the trio of women and began making his way toward her. Felicity's pulse quickened. She was aware of every eye in the room tracking Wesley's movement, and then the whispers starting when people realized he was heading toward her. "Miss Jensen," Wesley said as he reached her, and his smile was genuine, reaching all the way to his eyes. "I am glad you could make it. And please call me Wesley." "Felicity," she offered in return, too flustered to think of anything else to say. "I wanted to thank you again for yesterday. Dusty is still a bit skittish from the war years, and sometimes loud noises set him off. You handled him like you have been training horses your whole life." "Just farm horses," Felicity said. "Nothing special." "I would disagree with that assessment." Wesley's gaze was steady on her face, and Felicity found she could not look away. "I have been around horses and horse people my whole life, and what you did took skill and courage. Most folks, man or woman, would have run the other way." From the corner of her eye, Felicity could see the 3 young women who had been surrounding Wesley watching their conversation with expressions of confusion and displeasure. She could also see her mother chatting with Mrs. Yates, glancing over occasionally with barely concealed hope on her face. "Your brother seems to think highly of you," Felicity said, nodding toward Charlie, who had wandered off to examine a rifle mounted on the wall. Wesley's expression softened. Charlie is a good kid. Lost our father 2 years back, and he has had to grow up faster than he should have. This move is partly for him, to give him a fresh start in a place where he can just be a boy again. I am sorry about your father, Felicity said quietly. Thank you. It is part of why we are here, actually. Pa left us the money to buy land and start fresh, and Ma wanted to get away from Kansas, from all the memories. Wesley paused, then added, and I wanted to get away from expectations. Expectations? Wesley's mouth quirked in a wry smile. People's expectations of what I should be, who I should marry, how I should run my life. In our old town, everyone had an opinion about everything. Figured down here in Texas, I might be able to just be myself. Felicity understood that sentiment more than he could possibly know. Before she could respond, Mrs. Yates called everyone to dinner. The dining room had 2 long tables set up, and Felicity found herself directed to a seat between Charlie and her mother. Wesley was at the head of one table, with Mary Sullivan to his right and Elizabeth Drummond to his left, both of them preening under the attention. Felicity told herself she did not care, that it did not matter, but the small spark of hope that had been growing in her chest since yesterday guttered and died. Dinner was a lively affair, with multiple conversations happening at once. Mrs. Yates was an excellent hostess, making sure everyone felt included. Mr. Yates, Wesley's stepfather, Felicity learned, was a quiet man who spoke sparingly but with wisdom when he did. The food was delicious, and Felicity found herself actually enjoying the evening despite her earlier discomfort. It was after dinner, when the men had gathered on the front porch to smoke and talk business, and the women were in the parlor, that things took an uncomfortable turn. So, Miss Jensen, Mrs. Cooper said with a smile that did not quite reach her eyes, Wesley Yates seems quite taken with you. The room went quiet. Felicity felt every eye turn toward her. I do not know what you mean, Felicity said carefully. He was simply being polite to all his guests. Oh, but he spoke to you the longest, Mary Sullivan chimed in. Her tone was light, but there was an edge to it. We all noticed. He was thanking me for helping with his horse yesterday, Felicity explained, feeling heat creep up her neck. Nothing more. Mrs. Henderson laughed, the sound sharp. Dear, you must admit it would be quite the picture, would it not? The 2 tallest people in the county together. Like a pair of pine trees. Several women laughed, and Felicity felt the familiar shame wash over her. She looked down at her hands, wishing she could disappear. Now, Margaret, Mrs. Yates said, her voice pleasant but with steel underneath, I think my son has excellent taste. Miss Jensen strikes me as a capable, intelligent young woman, and those are qualities any sensible man should value. The rebuke was gentle but unmistakable, and Mrs. Henderson had the grace to look embarrassed. The conversation moved on to safer topics, but Felicity barely heard any of it. She was too focused on Mrs. Yates's words, on the defense of her that she had not expected. When the evening finally ended and the Jensen family was preparing to leave, Wesley walked them out to their wagon. In the darkness, with just the light from the house behind them, he seemed even taller, a solid presence against the star-filled Texas sky. Thank you for coming, he said, addressing Felicity's parents, but his eyes kept drifting to Felicity. I hope we will see more of you folks. It was a lovely evening, Rebecca Jensen said warmly. Thank you for your hospitality. Thomas helped his wife into the wagon, then turned to help Felicity, but Wesley stepped forward first. May I? Felicity nodded, unable to speak, and Wesley offered his hand. His grip was strong and steady, and he did not seem the least bit strained by her height or weight as he helped her up into the wagon. His hand lingered in hers for just a moment longer than necessary. Good night, Felicity, he said softly, and the way he said her name made her heart skip a beat. Good night, Wesley. On the ride home, her parents were uncharacteristically quiet until they were well away from the Yates property. Then her father cleared his throat. "That young man seems interested in you, daughter." "Papa, please," Felicity said, not wanting to have this conversation, not wanting to hope again. "He was just being kind to a neighbor." "Thomas is right," her mother added. "I saw the way he looked at you and the way you looked at him." Felicity closed her eyes. "It does not matter how anyone looks at anyone. I'm not going to get my hopes up just to have them crushed again." Her parents exchanged a look in the darkness, but they did not press the issue. Over the next 2 weeks, Felicity tried to put Wesley Yates out of her mind. She threw herself into work on the ranch, taking on extra chores, spending long hours in the garden or with the animals. But San Antonio was a small town, and avoiding someone was nearly impossible. She saw him at church the following Sunday, standing in the back because the pews were too short for his long legs. Their eyes met across the crowded room, and he smiled at her, a warm, genuine smile that made her stomach flip. After the service, he made his way through the crowd toward her, but before he could reach her, he was intercepted by Catherine Cooper and her mother, both of them determined to monopolize his attention. Felicity slipped away before he could extract himself, telling herself it was better this way. A few days later, she was in town picking up supplies when she ran into Charlie outside the general store. The boy's face lit up when he saw her. "Miss Jensen, I have been hoping to see you. Wesley has been asking about you." Felicity's heart did a traitorous little leap. "Has he?" "Yes, madam. He wanted to know if you folks needed any help with anything on your ranch. Said he owes you a favor for helping with Dusty." "That is kind, but we are managing fine," Felicity said. Even though her father had been complaining just that morning about needing to repair the barn roof before the next rain, Charlie looked disappointed. "Well, if you think of anything, let us know. Wesley is real good with his hands. He built our whole barn back in Kansas practically by himself." Before Felicity could respond, Mary Sullivan emerged from the store, her eyes narrowing when she saw Felicity and Charlie together. "Hello, Charlie," Mary said sweetly. "Is your brother in town today?" "Yes, madam, he is over at the feed store." Mary smiled triumphantly and hurried off in that direction, her skirts swishing with purpose. Charlie made a face. "She has been coming by the ranch every other day with some excuse or another," he said. "Yesterday it was to bring us a pie. Day before that, she needed to borrow a cup of sugar. Wesley is too polite to tell her to stop, but I can tell it bothers him." "Why would it bother him?" Felicity asked despite herself. "She is very pretty and from a good family." "Because he ain't interested in her," Charlie said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "He is interested in you." "Charlie, you should not say such things." "Why not? It is true. He told me himself." Felicity's heart was beating so hard she was sure Charlie could hear it. "He said that?" "Well, not in those exact words, but he asked me all sorts of questions about you. Where you lived, if you had a beau, what you liked to do. And he gets this look on his face when I talk about you, kind of happy and nervous at the same time." Felicity wanted to believe Charlie, wanted to let herself hope, but she had been hurt too many times. "Even if that were true, Charlie, it would not matter. Everyone in town expects him to court someone like Mary or Elizabeth or Catherine, someone pretty and small and proper." "But Wesley does not care about proper," Charlie insisted. "He cares about real, and you are the realest person he has met here." Before their conversation could continue, Wesley himself came around the corner, a bag of feed over one shoulder like it weighed nothing. He stopped short when he saw Felicity, and that smile spread across his face again. "Felicity," he said, setting down the feed. "This is a pleasant surprise." "Hello, Wesley," she managed, trying not to stare at the way his shirt stretched across his shoulders or the way the sun caught in his hair. "I was just telling Miss Jensen that you have been asking about her," Charlie announced, and Felicity wanted to sink through the boardwalk. Wesley shot his brother a look. "Charlie, why don't you go load that feed in the wagon?" "But I want to." "Now, Charlie." The boy sighed dramatically but obeyed, leaving Wesley and Felicity alone on the boardwalk. The silence stretched between them, not quite comfortable but not entirely awkward either. "I apologize for my brother," Wesley finally said. "He means well, but subtlety ain't his strong suit." "It is all right," Felicity said. "He is a sweet boy, he is." Wesley took a deep breath. "But he ain't wrong. I have been wanting to talk to you, but every time I try, someone else needs something or you disappear before I can get close." Felicity felt her cheeks flush. "I am not very good at social gatherings. Neither am I, to be honest. All that small talk and politeness wears me out." Wesley leaned against the post supporting the store's awning, a casual gesture that somehow made him seem even more attractive. "I prefer straight talking. So I am going to be straight with you if that is all right." Felicity's mouth went dry. "All right. I would like to call on you, properly with your parents' permission and all that. I know we have only met a couple of times, but I would like to get to know you better. And before you say no, I want you to know that I ain't asking because you are tall or despite you being tall or anything to do with your height at all. I am asking because when I met you, you were brave and kind and good with animals, and when I talked to you at dinner, you were interesting and genuine. Those are the things that matter to me." Felicity stared at him, her mind struggling to process what she was hearing. This could not be real. Men did not say things like this to her. Men did not want to court her. She started, then stopped, unsure what to say. "Wesley, you do not understand what you are asking. The town already talks about me enough. If you start courting me, they will talk about both of us. They will say terrible things. There are girls here, pretty girls from good families who would be much better suited." "I do not want those girls," Wesley interrupted gently. "And I do not care what the town says. I spent 26 years caring about what people thought, trying to fit into boxes that were too small for me, and I am done with it. I came to Texas to start fresh, to live life on my own terms. And if that means courting the tallest, bravest woman in San Antonio, despite what the gossips say, then that is exactly what I am going to do, if you will let me." Felicity felt tears prick at her eyes, but for once they were not tears of shame or hurt. "Why?" she whispered. "Why me?" Wesley's expression softened. "Can I show you something?" Without waiting for an answer, he held out his hand. Felicity hesitated only a moment before taking it, and Wesley led her off the boardwalk, around the side of the general store to where there was a measuring stick painted on the wall. It was something the town had put up years ago, originally to measure children's heights at the annual fair, but now it just sat unused. Wesley positioned Felicity with her back against the wall, her heels touching the baseboard. Then he stood beside her, his own back against the wall, and turned his head to look at her. "Look," he said softly. Felicity turned her head and their eyes met, perfectly level. They were exactly the same height, or so close it made no difference. For the first time in her life, Felicity was looking straight across at someone, not down, not up, but straight across. "I have spent my whole life being too tall," Wesley said quietly. "Too tall for doorways, too tall for beds, too tall for women to feel comfortable around. Most women I have known either are intimidated by my height, or they think it is my only interesting feature. But when I saw you calming Dusty, standing there tall and strong and completely confident, I thought, there is someone who understands. And when I stood next to you and could look you straight in the eye for the first time in my life, I thought, you fit perfectly here." Felicity could not speak past the lump in her throat. She had spent 19 years feeling too big, too much, too wrong. And here was Wesley telling her she was exactly right. So that is why, Wesley continued. Not because of some charitable impulse or because I feel sorry for you, but because for the first time in my life, I found someone who fits. A tear escaped and rolled down Felicity's cheek. Wesley reached up and gently wiped it away with his thumb, his hand lingering against her face. "Is that a yes?" he asked softly. "Can I court you, Felicity Jensen?" "Yes," Felicity breathed. "Yes, you can court me." Wesley's smile was like sunrise, bright and warm and full of promise. "Thank you," he said, and there was such genuine happiness in his voice that Felicity felt her own heart swell in response. They stood there for a moment longer, backs against the wall, eyes locked on each other, the measuring stick behind them marking their equal heights. Then reality intruded in the form of Charlie calling for Wesley from the wagon. "I should go," Wesley said reluctantly, "but I will come by your family's ranch tomorrow if that is all right, to speak with your father properly." "He will say yes," Felicity assured him. "He likes you." "Good. Because I plan on spending a lot of time at the Jensen ranch in the coming weeks." Wesley squeezed her hand once more before letting go and heading back to his wagon. Felicity watched him go, her hand still tingling from his touch, her heart lighter than it had been in years. As the wagon pulled away, Charlie leaned out and waved enthusiastically at her, and she could not help but laugh and wave back. The walk home seemed shorter somehow, her feet barely touching the ground. When she arrived at the ranch, her mother took one look at her face and smiled knowingly. "Wesley Yates is coming to call tomorrow," Felicity announced, unable to keep the joy out of her voice. Her mother let out a happy cry and pulled Felicity into a tight hug. "Oh, sweetheart, I am so happy for you." Her father was more reserved, but Felicity could see the pleased expression on his face. "He is a good man from what I have seen. Hardworking, respectful. I will hear him out tomorrow." True to his word, Wesley arrived the next afternoon dressed in his Sunday best, his hat in his hands as he stood on the Jensen's front porch. Felicity watched from the kitchen window as her father invited him in, and the two men disappeared into her father's study for what felt like an eternity. When they finally emerged, both men were smiling, and Felicity felt relief wash over her. "Mr. Yates has my permission to court you," her father announced formally, though his eyes were twinkling. "Provided you are agreeable, daughter." "I am very agreeable, Papa," Felicity said, trying not to grin too widely and failing completely. "Then it is settled," Wesley said, his own smile matching hers. "Miss Jensen, would you do me the honor of accompanying me on a buggy ride this Sunday afternoon after church? I would be delighted." The next few days passed in a blur of anticipation and nerves. Felicity's mother helped her press her best dress and retrim her Sunday hat. Daniel and Sarah came by to hear the news, and Sarah actually seemed genuinely happy for her, hugging Felicity tightly and telling her how romantic it all was. Sunday finally arrived. At church, the news of Wesley and Felicity's courtship had already spread through the congregation like wildfire, and Felicity could feel the stares and hear the whispers as she walked to her usual pew in the back. But this time, Wesley was waiting for her there, standing tall and unbothered by the attention, and he smiled when he saw her. "May I sit with you?" he asked. "Please," Felicity said, and when he settled beside her, their shoulders almost touching, she felt a sense of rightness she had never experienced before. The service seemed to drag on forever, though Preacher Matthews delivered a fine sermon about loving your neighbor. Felicity caught several of the young women in the congregation glancing back at her and Wesley with expressions ranging from confusion to barely concealed jealousy. Mary Sullivan looked particularly put out, her face pinched with displeasure. After the service, as people gathered outside for the usual socializing, Mrs. Henderson approached Felicity with a tight smile. "Miss Jensen, Mr. Yates," she said with forced politeness. "I hear congratulations are in order." "Thank you, madam," Wesley said smoothly, his hand coming to rest lightly on the small of Felicity's back, a gesture of both support and claim. "It is certainly unexpected," Mrs. Henderson continued. "You make quite the striking pair. We do, don't we?" Wesley agreed cheerfully, missing or ignoring the subtle jab in her words. "I consider myself very fortunate that Miss Jensen agreed to let me court her, Mrs." Henderson looked like she had bitten into something sour, but she could not say anything directly rude without appearing uncharitable in front of the congregation. She excused herself quickly, and Felicity had to suppress a laugh. "You did that on purpose," she murmured to Wesley. "Did what?" He asked innocently, but his eyes were dancing with amusement. "I simply stated a fact. I am fortunate." They took their leave shortly after, Wesley helping Felicity up into his buggy with the same care he had shown at his family's dinner. It was a beautiful afternoon, warm but not oppressively hot, with a light breeze that carried the scent of wildflowers from the hills beyond town. Wesley guided the buggy out of town, heading toward the open range where the land stretched out in rolling hills covered in golden grass and dotted with oak trees. They rode in comfortable silence for a while, just enjoying each other's presence and the beauty of the day. "Tell me about yourself," Wesley finally said. "I want to know everything. Where you grew up, what you love, what you dream about." Felicity laughed softly. "There is not much to tell. I have lived in San Antonio my whole life. Helped my parents run the ranch, went to school until I was 16, been too tall for as long as I can remember." "That cannot be all there is to Felicity Jensen," Wesley said. "What do you love? What makes you happy?" Felicity thought about it. "I love animals," she said slowly. "Working with them, caring for them. They do not judge or make assumptions. A horse does not care if you are tall or short, pretty or plain. It just cares if you are kind and patient." She paused, then added, "And I love reading, though I have to hide it sometimes." "Papa thinks too much reading gives women ideas." Wesley smiled. "What do you like to read?" "Adventure stories, mostly. Tales of faraway places and brave people doing extraordinary things. It is silly, I know." "It is not silly at all," Wesley said firmly. "I like reading too. History, mostly, and sometimes poetry, though I would never admit that to most folks." "Poetry?" Felicity looked at him with surprise. "Really? Don't sound so shocked," Wesley said with a laugh. "Just because I am a cowboy does not mean I cannot appreciate a well-turned phrase. My mother used to read to me and Charlie when we were young. Wordsworth, Byron, even some Shakespeare. It stuck with me." They talked for hours as Wesley drove the buggy through the countryside. He told her about growing up in Kansas, about his father who had died from pneumonia 2 winters ago, about the cattle ranch they had run, and how hard it had been to leave, but how necessary it felt to start fresh, somewhere new. He told her about his plans for the ranch here in Texas, his hopes of building it into something substantial, something he could be proud of. Felicity found herself opening up in ways she never had before, telling him about the loneliness of being different, about watching all her friends from school get married while she stood on the sidelines. She told him about the small cruelties people inflicted without even realizing it, about the way she had learned to make herself small despite her size, to apologize for taking up space. "You should never apologize for who you are," Wesley said fiercely. "The world needs people who take up space, who stand tall and refuse to shrink themselves for others' comfort. That is what I admire most about you, Felicity. You are brave. Maybe you do not see it, but I do. It takes courage to keep standing tall when the world keeps trying to cut you down." His words touched something deep inside her, a wound she had carried for so long that she had forgotten it was there. Tears pricked at her eyes again, and Wesley pulled the buggy to a stop under the shade of a massive oak tree. He turned to her, his expression concerned. "Did I say something wrong?" "No," Felicity said, wiping at her eyes. "You said something very right. No one has ever said anything like that to me before." Wesley reached over and took her hand, his large, calloused hand completely enveloping hers. "Then people have been fools. And I am glad to be the first, but I intend to spend a very long time reminding you of how remarkable you are." They sat there under the oak tree, hands clasped, and Felicity felt something shift inside her. For the first time in her life, she felt seen, truly seen, not as the too tall girl or the unfortunate Jensen daughter, but as herself. Just Felicity. And it was enough. As the afternoon wore on, they reluctantly turned the buggy back toward town. Wesley drove her home, and when they arrived at the Jensen ranch, he helped her down from the buggy, his hands lingering on her waist. "May I call on you again?" he asked. "Soon. Tomorrow," Felicity suggested hopefully, and Wesley laughed. "Tomorrow," he agreed. "And the day after that, and the day after that, if you will have me." "I will have you," Felicity said softly, and the look Wesley gave her then was so full of warmth and promise that it made her breath catch. The courtship that followed was unlike anything Felicity could have imagined. Wesley was attentive without being smothering, romantic without being overly sentimental. He came by the ranch nearly every day, sometimes to help with chores, sometimes just to sit on the porch and talk with Felicity while she worked on mending or shelling peas. Her parents clearly approved, and even Daniel warmed to Wesley quickly. The two men bonding over talk of cattle and horses and the best methods for building fences that would last. In town, the reaction was mixed. Some people were genuinely happy for Felicity, glad to see her find someone after years of being overlooked. But others, particularly some of the young women who had set their caps for Wesley, were less kind. Felicity overheard more than one conversation about how strange they looked together, how they were like two giants who had found each other by default rather than genuine attraction. Wesley seemed unbothered by the talk. If anything, he went out of his way to demonstrate his affection for Felicity, holding her hand as they walked through town, pulling out chairs for her at church socials, bringing her flowers from the wildflower-covered hills. His public devotion silenced some of the critics, though not all. One evening, about 3 weeks into their courtship, Wesley arrived at the ranch later than usual, his face troubled. Felicity was sitting on the porch watching the sunset, and she stood immediately when she saw his expression. "What is wrong?" she asked. Wesley dismounted and climbed the porch steps to stand beside her. "I had an interesting conversation in town today," he said carefully, "with Mary Sullivan's father." Felicity's stomach dropped. "What did he say?" "He pulled me aside at the feed store and told me that I was making a mistake courting you. Said that a man of my stature and prospects should be looking for a wife who would be an asset to him, someone who would make him look good in society." Wesley's jaw tightened. He suggested Mary would be a much more suitable choice. Felicity felt the old shame creeping back in. "Maybe he is right," she said quietly. "Maybe you should consider—" "Felicity Jensen, don't you dare finish that sentence," Wesley interrupted, his voice firm but gentle. He took both her hands in his. "I told Mr. Sullivan in no uncertain terms that I was courting the woman I wanted to marry, and that his daughter, lovely as she may be, was not that woman. I told him that I found you beautiful, intelligent, capable, and kind, and that those qualities were worth more to me than any amount of social standing." You said you wanted to marry me, Felicity whispered, focusing on those words above all others. Wesley's expression softened. I did. I know it has only been a few weeks, but I know my own mind, Felicity. I have known since that first day when you stood in front of that spooked horse without a second thought that you were someone special, and every day since has only confirmed it. I want to marry you if you will have me. I want to build a life with you, raise a family with you, grow old with you. Felicity's heart was pounding so hard she could barely hear over it. Wesley, yes, I want that too. Wesley's face split into a wide grin and he pulled her into his arms, lifting her slightly off the ground despite her height. She laughed, dizzy with joy and disbelief, and when he set her back down, his expression had turned serious again. I want to do this right, he said. I want to court you properly for a few more months, let you be absolutely certain. And then, if you still want me, I will ask your father for your hand, and we will plan a wedding that will make every gossip in San Antonio talk for years. They will talk anyway, Felicity pointed out. Then let us give them something worth talking about, Wesley said, and he leaned down and kissed her forehead gently, reverently. Let us show them what real love looks like. The next few months passed in a golden haze of happiness. Autumn came to Texas, bringing cooler temperatures and spectacular sunsets that painted the sky in shades of orange and purple. Wesley continued to court Felicity with a devotion that made even the skeptics begin to soften. He integrated himself into the community, helping neighbors with barn raisings and fence repairs, always mentioning Felicity and her family with respect and affection. Slowly, the narrative in town began to change. Instead of seeing Wesley and Felicity as oddities, people began to see them as a love story, as two people who had found their perfect match against the odds. The three young women who had initially pursued Wesley eventually moved on to other prospects, and while some people never fully warmed to the idea of Felicity as a suitable wife for anyone, their voices became quieter, drowned out by those who supported the match. In December, as the first cold snap hit San Antonio and people began preparing for Christmas, Wesley asked Thomas Jensen for Felicity's hand in marriage. Thomas gave his blessing gladly, and Wesley proposed to Felicity on Christmas Eve, in front of both their families, with a simple gold band that had belonged to his grandmother. Felicity Jensen, he said, kneeling in front of her in the Jensen family parlor, looking up at her with those blue-gray eyes full of love, will you marry me? Will you be my partner, my companion, my wife? Yes, Felicity said through happy tears. Yes, 1,000 times yes. The wedding was planned for late spring, giving them time to prepare and for the weather to warm. Felicity's mother went into a frenzy of sewing and planning, determined to give her daughter the beautiful wedding she had always dreamed of. Wesley and Felicity spent the winter months making plans for their future, deciding to build a house on the Yates property that would accommodate both their heights, with doorways and ceilings tall enough that neither would have to duck or stoop. In March, tragedy struck. There was a fire at one of the neighboring ranches, the Patterson place, and several people were trapped inside. Wesley was one of the first on the scene, and he did not hesitate to run into the burning building to help get people out. He emerged with two of the Patterson children in his arms, coughing from the smoke but alive. Felicity, who had ridden to the scene as soon as she heard, felt her heart stop and restart when she saw him. She ran to him, and he passed the children to waiting hands before pulling Felicity into his arms. I am all right, he said hoarsely. I am all right. You could have died, Felicity said, her voice shaking. You could have died, and we have not even gotten married yet. Wesley cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs wiping away her tears. I did not die. I am here, and I am marrying you in 2 months, and we are going to have a long, wonderful life together. I promise you." The fire and Wesley's heroism cemented his place in the community's respect. Even the people who had been skeptical of his relationship with Felicity could not help but admire his courage and selflessness. The Patterson family was particularly grateful, and they became staunch supporters of Wesley and Felicity's union. Finally, in late May of 1879, on a beautiful spring day with wildflowers blooming across the hills, and the sky a brilliant blue, Felicity Jensen married Wesley Yates in the San Antonio church, where she had spent so many Sundays feeling out of place. She wore a dress her mother had sewn with painstaking care, white cotton with delicate embroidery at the collar and cuffs. Her hair was pinned up with flowers, and for once, she did not feel too tall or too much or too anything. She felt exactly right. Wesley waited for her at the altar, dressed in a new suit that made his eyes look even bluer, and when she walked down the aisle on her father's arm, the look on Wesley's face told her everything she needed to know. He loved her, completely, wholly, exactly as she was. The ceremony was simple but beautiful. Preacher Matthews spoke about love and partnership, about two becoming one while still remaining themselves. When it came time for the vows, Wesley's voice was strong and clear as he promised to love, honor, and cherish Felicity for all his days. Felicity's voice shook only a little as she made the same promises, her hands clasped in Wesley's, her eyes locked on his face. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Preacher Matthews said with a smile. "Wesley, you may kiss your bride." Wesley leaned down, Felicity tilted her face up, and they met perfectly in the middle, eye to eye, heart to heart, exactly as they were always meant to fit. The kiss was sweet and tender and full of promise, and when they broke apart, the church erupted in applause and cheers. They walked back down the aisle together, hand in hand, and Felicity saw the faces of the congregation as they passed. Her parents crying happy tears, Charlie grinning widely, Daniel and Sarah with baby Thomas in Sarah's arms, Mrs. Yates looking proud and pleased. And yes, there were still some sour faces, some people who would never fully accept them, but Felicity found she did not care anymore. She had Wesley and Wesley had her, and that was all that mattered. The reception was held at the Yates Ranch, with tables set up under the oak trees and food enough to feed the entire town. There was music and dancing, and when Wesley led Felicity out for their first dance as husband and wife, she did not have to stretch up on her toes or bend down awkwardly. They danced as equals, perfectly matched, and Felicity felt a happiness so complete it almost frightened her. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Wesley pulled Felicity away from the celebration, leading her to a quiet spot near the barn where they could watch the sunset in peace. "Happy?" he asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder. "More than I ever thought possible," Felicity answered honestly. "Wesley, I spent so many years thinking I would never have this, a husband who loves me, a future full of promise. I thought I was too different, too wrong." Wesley turned her in his arms so she faced him, his expression serious. "You were never wrong, Felicity. The people who could not see your worth were wrong. I just count myself lucky that I was smart enough to see what was right in front of me." "A 6'2" woman who calms spooked horses," Felicity teased. "The most beautiful woman I have ever seen," Wesley corrected. "Who happens to also be brave, kind, intelligent, and the perfect height to kiss without either of us getting a crick in our neck." He demonstrated this last point by kissing her thoroughly, and Felicity melted into his embrace, marveling at how perfectly they fit together, how his arms seemed made to hold her, how his heart beat in rhythm with hers. They stood there for a long time, wrapped in each other's arms, watching the sun sink below the horizon and the stars begin to emerge in the darkening sky. From the house, they could still hear the sounds of celebration, music and laughter floating on the evening breeze. "We should get back," Felicity finally murmured, though she made no move to leave Wesley's embrace. "In a minute," Wesley said. "I just want to hold you a little longer, Mrs. Yates." Mrs. Yates, Felicity Yates. She tested the name in her mind and found it fit perfectly, just like everything else about Wesley. They did eventually return to the party, accepting congratulations and well wishes from their guests. As the evening wound down and families began heading home, Felicity found herself standing with Wesley, his mother, and Charlie, watching the last of the wagons disappear down the road. "Welcome to the family officially," Mrs. Yates said, hugging Felicity warmly. "I could not have asked for a better daughter. Thank you," Felicity said, emotion thick in her voice, "for everything, for welcoming me, for defending me, for raising such a wonderful son." Mrs. Yates smiled. "Wesley found you all on his own. I just raised him to be smart enough to recognize a treasure when he saw one." Charlie, looking tired but happy, hugged Felicity next. "I am glad you are my sister now," he said. "Wesley has been smiling more since he met you than I have seen him smile in years." "And I have you to thank for that," Felicity said, ruffling his hair. "If you hadn't insisted your brother would like me, I might not have had the courage to hope." After Mrs. Yates and Charlie retired to the main house, Wesley led Felicity to the new house he had built for them, the one with tall doorways and high ceilings and windows that let in floods of light. It was modest but well made, with a large bedroom and a kitchen that would be perfect for the family Felicity hoped they would have someday. "It is perfect," Felicity breathed, looking around at the home Wesley had created for them. "You are perfect," Wesley said, pulling her close again. "And this is just the beginning, Felicity. We have our whole lives ahead of us, and I plan to spend every day of it showing you how much I love you." True to his word, Wesley did exactly that. The first year of their marriage was one of adjustment and joy, learning each other's habits and quirks, building their life together one day at a time. Wesley expanded the ranch, buying more cattle and horses, and Felicity surprised everyone, including herself, by showing a real talent for training horses. Word spread, and soon people were coming from surrounding counties to have Felicity Yates train their problem horses. The town's attitude toward Felicity shifted completely. Where once she had been pitied or mocked, she was now respected, admired even. She was the woman who had won Wesley Yates's heart, the woman who could gentle the wildest horse, the woman who stood tall and proud beside her equally tall husband and made it look like the most natural thing in the world. In the spring of 1880, Felicity discovered she was expecting their first child. Wesley was overjoyed, immediately becoming overprotective and insisting Felicity reduce her workload. She humored him, even though she felt perfectly fine and continued to work with the horses well into her pregnancy. In December of that year, Felicity gave birth to a healthy baby boy they named William Thomas Yates, after Wesley's late father and Felicity's father. William was long and sturdy, and the doctor predicted he would be tall like his parents. Wesley held his son with a tenderness that made Felicity fall in love with him all over again. And she watched, as this strong, capable man was reduced to tears of joy by the tiny human in his arms. 2 years later, they had a daughter, Grace Rebecca Yates, named after Wesley's mother's mother and Felicity's mother. Grace was petite and delicate, taking after neither parent in height, and Felicity sometimes wondered if her daughter would grow up to be one of those small, pretty girls Felicity had envied in her youth. But Grace had her father's determination and her mother's kindness, and she was loved fiercely. As the years passed, Wesley and Felicity built not just a family but a legacy. Their ranch became one of the most successful in the region, known for quality cattle and exceptionally trained horses. They added on to their house as their family grew, eventually having 2 more children, another son named Daniel and a daughter named Charlotte. Charlie grew into a fine young man, taking over much of the ranch management and eventually courting and marrying a sensible young woman named Helen, who thought Charlie's older brother and sister-in-law were the most romantic couple she had ever met. Mrs. Yates lived to see all her grandchildren born, passing peacefully in her sleep in 1889, surrounded by family and love. Felicity's parents also lived long, happy lives, delighted by their grandchildren, and proud of the life their daughter had built. Thomas Jensen often said that allowing Wesley Yates to court his daughter was the best decision he ever made. And Rebecca loved to tell the story of how Wesley had pursued Felicity despite all the town gossips, how love had conquered prejudice and small-mindedness. As for the town of San Antonio itself, it grew and changed over the years, but the story of Wesley and Felicity Yates became part of its folklore. Old-timers would tell newcomers about the tall woman who was mocked until a cowboy saw her worth, about the love that bloomed between 2 people who fit together perfectly. Young girls who felt different or out of place would hear the story and take heart, knowing that somewhere out there was someone who would see them as they truly were. On a warm evening in 1898, as the century drew to a close, Wesley and Felicity sat on the porch of their home, watching the sunset paint the Texas sky in brilliant colors. They were in their 40s now, their children mostly grown, their hair showing threads of gray, but their love had only deepened with time. "You remember the first time we watched a sunset together?" Wesley asked, his arm around Felicity's shoulders. "Our wedding day," Felicity said, leaning into his embrace. "You told me I was the most beautiful woman you had ever seen." "You still are," Wesley said, and Felicity could hear the smile in his voice. "More so now than ever. You know what I love most about growing older with you?" "What?" "Watching you become more fully yourself with every passing year. You stand even taller now than you did at 19, not in height but in spirit. You have never apologized for who you are, not once since we married. You have shown our children, especially our daughters, that being different is a gift, not a curse. You have made me proud every single day of our marriage." Felicity felt tears prick at her eyes, the good kind of tears that came from being deeply, truly seen and loved. "You gave me that, Wesley. You taught me that I was not too tall, too much, too anything. You taught me that I was exactly right, just as I was." "We taught each other," Wesley corrected gently. "You taught me that true strength is not just physical, it is emotional and spiritual. You taught me that love is not about finding someone perfect. It is about finding someone who is perfect for you. You taught me that fitting together is not about being the same. It is about complementing each other, supporting each other, choosing each other every single day." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sky deepen from gold to purple to the deep blue of early evening. From inside the house, they could hear the sounds of their family. Grace was visiting with her husband and 2 children, and Charlotte was home from school. The house was full of life and love and laughter, everything Felicity had once thought she would never have. "You ever think about that day in town when you helped me with Dusty?" Wesley asked. "Sometimes," Felicity admitted. "I think about how close I came to walking away, to letting fear and past hurt keep me from even hoping. If you had not been so persistent, if you had not seen something in me worth pursuing, we might never have had all of this." "But I did see it," Wesley said firmly. And you were brave enough to let me prove it to you. That is what I want our children to remember, Felicity. Not that we were tall or different or that people talked. I want them to remember that we chose love over fear, that we chose each other despite the odds, and that we built something beautiful together. They will remember, Felicity assured him. How could they not? You tell them the story every chance you get, Wesley laughed. Because it is a good story. The best story. The tall girl who thought she would never be loved and the cowboy who told her she fit perfectly in his life and in his heart. It is a good story, Felicity agreed, tilting her face up to kiss her husband's cheek. Our story. As the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, and the sounds of their family drifted through the open windows, Wesley and Felicity Yates sat together on their porch. Two tall figures silhouetted against the evening sky, fitting together as perfectly as they always had. They had built a life that defied expectations, a love that had weathered every storm, a family that would carry their legacy forward into the new century. And in the town of San Antonio, Texas, their story would be told and retold for generations to come. The story of the woman who was mocked for being too tall, until a cowboy looked at her and said the words she had waited her whole life to hear. You fit perfectly here, in my arms, in my life, in my heart. Perfectly. The town that had once looked at Felicity Jensen with pity or scorn now looked at Felicity Yates with respect and admiration. The young girls who had once whispered about her behind their hands now brought their daughters to meet her, to hear her story, to learn from her example. She became a pillar of the community, known for her kindness, her skill with horses, her devotion to her family, and her unshakable sense of self-worth. Wesley remained by her side through it all, her partner in every sense of the word. They worked together, laughed together, raised their children together, and grew old together. And through it all, they never stopped being amazed by how perfectly they fit. Two tall souls in a world that tried to make them small, standing together and proving that love sees past superficial differences to the heart of what truly matters. Their grandchildren would later say that they never saw one without the other, that even in their later years, Wesley and Felicity could often be found walking hand in hand through the ranch, still the same height, still looking at each other with the same love and wonder that had brought them together in the first place. And when they were both very old, sitting on that same porch where they had spent countless evenings watching the sunset, Felicity would sometimes think back to that 19-year-old girl who had hunched her shoulders and tried to make herself smaller, who had believed the whispers and doubts, who had thought she was too different to ever be loved. She would think of that girl with compassion and wish she could go back and tell her that everything was going to be all right, that her difference was not a flaw but a gift, that somewhere out there was a man who would look at her and see not a spectacle but a soulmate. But then she would feel Wesley's hand tighten on hers, would see the life they had built together spread out before them in the form of their children and grandchildren. And she would know that that girl would not have believed it anyway. She had to live it to believe it, had to experience Wesley's love to understand that it was possible, had to build this life one day at a time to know that it was real. What are you thinking about? Wesley would ask, because even after all these years he could still read her expressions, still knew when her mind had wandered into the past. I am thinking about how lucky I am, Felicity would answer. How blessed, how grateful. That makes two of us, Wesley would say, and he would lean over to kiss her forehead the way he had done 1,000 times before, and Felicity would close her eyes and know, deep in her bones, that she was exactly where she was meant to be, perfectly fitting, perfectly loved, perfectly home.